thing that happened? Was it just one episode or was it multiple episodes?
On television?
On television.
On my show?
On your show.
Oh, I'll call everybody a crackhead.
Right.
For nearly 40 years, Judge Greg Mathis was sold to America as a symbol of moral authority. On television, he scolded strangers, handed down tough lessons, and reminded millions that choices have consequences. Viewers didn't just watch him, they trusted him. Parents quoted him. Teachers used his words. He wasn't just a judge, he was a role model. Then, in August 2024, the image cracked wide open. His wife, Linda, filed for divorce after almost 4 decades of marriage. Within days, the internet turned restless. Whispers became headlines, stories of an affair surfaced, rumors of a secret child spread like wildfire. Even people closest to him admitted they were blindsided. The same man who built a career lecturing others about loyalty and discipline was suddenly fighting to explain his own life. What shocked people most wasn't just the divorce. It was how fast everything unraveled. 3 weeks. That's all it took for decades of control to collapse into public chaos. Fans began asking uncomfortable questions. Had this always been there? Was the TV judge real or just a carefully managed version of the truth? To understand how a man could rise so high and still fall, you have to go back to a place where survival mattered more than reputation. Greg Mathis was born on April 5, 1960, in Herman Gardens, one of Detroit's largest public housing projects. When it was built in the 1940s, it symbolized opportunity for working families. But by the time Greg was old enough to remember anything, the dream had decayed. Buildings were crumbling, paint peeled from walls. Hallways felt tense, not welcoming. His father left early, leaving Greg's mother to raise 4 boys on her own. She worked relentlessly, juggling jobs just to keep food on the table. But effort didn't erase reality. Bills piled up faster than paychecks. Herman Gardens wasn't a stepping stone. It felt like a dead end. As a child, Greg noticed how the world treated people from his neighborhood. Police cars circled constantly. Outsiders avoided the area. Kids learned early that expectations were low and forgiveness even lower. The message was subtle but clear. This is where people get stuck. And the longer Greg stayed there, the more that message sank in. It didn't feel like childhood. It felt like training for something darker. By the late 1960s, Herman Gardens had changed completely. Drugs moved in quietly at first, then all at once. Heroin became common. Fear followed. One night, that fear exploded into Greg's home. A man high on heroin forced his way into their apartment and tried to attack his mother. For Greg and his brothers, time froze. Their home, the one place meant to be safe, shattered in seconds. They grabbed what they could and ran. No plan, just escape. But leaving didn't save them. The next place they landed was even worse. Gunshots echoed regularly. Sirens became background noise. Sleep came lightly, if at all. That night changed Greg forever. It taught him a brutal lesson early. Safety was temporary, and protection didn't come automatically. If you wanted to survive, you had to be ready. That belief settled deep into him, shaping how he saw the world long before he ever picked up a weapon. Detroit in the early 1970s was a city under pressure. Vietnam veterans returned home carrying trauma and addiction, and heroin flooded neighborhoods like Herman Gardens. Dealers controlled corners. Neighbors stopped trusting each other. Doors stayed locked. Greg grew up watching adults break under stress. Hunger wasn't rare, neither was anger. Schools struggled to contain the chaos spilling in from the streets. Kids brought weapons. Fights broke out daily. Authority felt weak. Respect came from fear. For Greg, childhood emotions hardened early. Fear turned into vigilance. Shame turned into defiance. He didn't feel protected by rules. He felt trapped by them. And when fear becomes constant, danger starts to feel familiar. That familiarity would soon pull him toward choices that felt less like rebellion and more like survival. Around age 10, Greg took his first real step into street life. Along with other boys from the projects, he began committing small crimes, stealing groceries, breaking into places for quick cash. At first, it felt necessary. Food mattered more than rules. But something else happened. The fear faded. Success, even small, felt empowering. No lectures, no punishment that stuck, just results. The streets rewarded risk faster than school ever rewarded effort. Teachers talked about futures Greg couldn't see. The streets offered money, status, and belonging right now. Each theft made the next one easier. Each risk felt smaller. Without realizing it, Greg crossed a line where crime stopped being an emergency solution and started becoming a lifestyle. And once that shift happens, turning back becomes much harder, especially for a kid who already believes the world expects him to fail. By the time Greg was 13, danger no longer surprised him. It was expected. Still, nothing prepares a kid for the sound of a gun firing in real life. During a robbery, everything went wrong. Panic, shouting. Then the shot. Greg went down, bleeding, staring at a world that suddenly felt distant and unreal. For most children, being shot would have been the moment everything stopped. A wake-up call. For Greg, it did the opposite. In his environment, getting shot didn't mean you failed. It meant you were active. It meant you were involved. It meant you weren't invisible. When word spread, the reaction wasn't sympathy. It was respect. That response rewired something inside him. Pain became proof of belonging. Survival felt like achievement. Fear didn't push him away from the streets. It pulled him deeper in. From that point on, Greg didn't just live around violence. He carried it with him, like armor, convinced that toughness was the only thing keeping him alive. After the shooting, trouble followed faster. By 14, Greg was already known to police. By 15, arrests felt routine. Purse snatching, breaking into homes, gun possession. Each arrest came with warnings, paperwork, and short stints in juvenile detention. Then release. The system didn't scare him. It processed him. Detention centers felt temporary, almost predictable. There was no shock, no real interruption. School tried to intervene, but classrooms couldn't compete with the streets. Teachers talked about grades while Greg worried about getting home alive. Eventually, the pressure became too much. At 15, he dropped out of high school entirely. Structure disappeared. Time opened up, and the streets were always ready to fill it. Without school, without supervision, Greg's days blended together into survival, hustle, and constant movement. The system was watching him, but it wasn't stopping him. Around age 12, Greg joined the Errol Flynn crew, one of Detroit's most feared street groups at the time. At first, it felt like protection, brotherhood, direction. Older members taught him how to move, who to trust, and how not to look weak. The jobs started small, stealing food, reselling it inside the projects. But ambition grew fast. Soon they were committing armed robberies and planning break-ins. What separated them from others was their boldness. They didn't just target random houses. They studied police officers, watched schedules, broke into their homes to steal guns. Those weapons carried weight. Walking the streets with a gun taken from a cop sent a message. It said rules didn't apply here. It said power could be stolen. And for Greg, that message felt intoxicating. The gang didn't judge his past. It rewarded it. And that made leaving almost unthinkable. By 15, Greg had moved from stealing to dealing heroin. This wasn't occasional. It was every day. Detroit was deep in a heroin epidemic, and demand was constant. Greg ran real operations inside the projects. The money came fast, and it went straight into weapons. Guns weren't accessories. They were necessities. Shootouts were common. Greg later admitted he carried a firearm almost daily and fired it often. These weren't warning shots meant to scare. They were real exchanges in dark hallways and empty lots. The streets taught him a harsh rule. Hesitation gets you hurt. So Greg stayed ready, alert, hardened. Violence stopped feeling extreme. It felt practical. And when that happens, morality gets quiet. Survival takes the wheel. But every bullet fired was writing a future Greg couldn't yet see. By 17, Greg's juvenile record was overwhelming. More than 20 arrests, burglary, gun charges, drug offenses. He moved through detention centers so often they blurred together. Lockup, release, promises, repeat. But something changed when he was caught carrying a concealed handgun in Detroit. This time, the system didn't see a kid. It saw a pattern. Prosecutors charged him as an adult. The tone shifted instantly. No lectures, no second chances, just consequences. Greg was sentenced to 9 months in Wayne County Jail. Not juvenile detention, adult jail. The kind with hardened men, real fear, and no safety net. For the first time, the streets couldn't protect him, and what waited for him inside would finally force him to look at the life he'd been running toward. Wayne County Jail was nothing like juvenile detention. The doors slammed heavier. The silence felt threatening. Greg wasn't surrounded by confused kids anymore. He was locked in with grown men who had nothing to lose. The street image that once protected him meant nothing here. For the first time, he felt small, exposed. Then his mother came to visit. She hadn't visited him during his juvenile lockups. This time was different. She looked at him through the glass and didn't sugarcoat a single word. She told him he had embarrassed her, that people whispered about him in church, in the neighborhood, everywhere his name came up. Then she dropped the sentence that crushed him. She had colon cancer. She didn't know how long she had left. That moment broke something open inside him. Toughness disappeared. All that remained was fear. Not of jail, but of losing the one person who never gave up on him. If this story is already changing how you see redemption, tap like and subscribe. Because what happens next is where everything shifts. And ask yourself this: if you were him, would this moment be enough to change you? Or would it already be too late? After that visit, Greg replayed his mother's words endlessly. Not the anger, the disappointment. That cut deeper. She had carried 4 boys alone through poverty, violence, and fear, and now she was facing a life-threatening illness while her son sat behind bars. For years, Greg had accepted the idea that he might die young. That was normal in his world. What he had never accepted was the thought of his mother dying while he was still the same person, still locked up, still chasing the streets. That fear didn't feel like panic. It felt like pressure, heavy, constant. He realized something terrifying. If nothing changed, this would be his life forever. Jail, release, rearrest, loss, and regret would be the only thing waiting at the end. That realization didn't make him hopeful. It made him desperate. But desperation can still move mountains. The judge gave Greg a choice that sounded simple but carried enormous weight. Finish your sentence like this, or earn your GED and accept probation. No school meant no freedom. This wasn't framed as redemption. It was framed as a test, proof that Greg could follow rules when it mattered. For the first time, the system wasn't just punishing him, it was watching him. Greg said yes, not because he suddenly believed in education, but because he couldn't stand the thought of staying the same. He studied inside jail, passed his GED, and because of that decision, he was released after just 3 months instead of serving the full 9. Walking out didn't feel like victory. It felt like being dropped into open water. No excuses left, no room to fail quietly. Once released, Greg enrolled in Operation Push, a program designed for young people most society had already written off. He was still on probation, still surrounded by temptation. But something had shifted. He had seen where the other path ended. 6 months later, at 18, Greg enrolled at Eastern Michigan University. Sitting in a college classroom felt unreal. He didn't belong culturally. He didn't speak the language yet, but he listened. Public administration, activism, law. For the first time, Greg saw power that didn't come from fear or weapons. It came from knowledge, from control of systems that once controlled him, and once that idea took root, it refused to let go. Greg didn't transform overnight. He worked during the day and attended law school at night at the University of Detroit Mercy. Exhaustion was constant. Doubt followed him everywhere. His past wasn't hidden, it was waiting. Still, he pushed forward. Years passed. In May 1987, Greg earned his law degree. On paper, it was a miracle. The former gang member, the former inmate, now a law school graduate. But celebration didn't last long, because just as he thought he had outrun his past, the past prepared to remind him that society never forgets, and the next rejection would test him harder than prison ever did. Graduating from law school should have been the finish line. Instead, it became another wall. Greg applied to the Michigan bar with confidence, believing his transformation spoke for itself. Then the rejection arrived. The reason wasn't academic, it wasn't procedural, it was personal. His criminal record. Everything he had survived, the streets, jail, the struggle to change, was now being used as proof that he wasn't fit to practice law. The message was clear: people can change, but institutions don't always believe it. For Greg, this rejection felt worse than prison. Jail had an end date. This felt permanent. A reminder that no matter how far he ran, his past still walked beside him. But instead of retreating, Greg made a decision that would redefine his future. If the system wouldn't open the door, he would challenge the lock. Greg appealed the decision, not emotionally, strategically. He gathered evidence of rehabilitation, character witnesses, proof of years without trouble, academic records, community involvement. The appeal wasn't just about him anymore. It became about a larger question. Can someone who once broke the law ever be trusted to uphold it? Standing before the same system that once confined him, Greg argued that lived experience didn't disqualify him, it prepared him. He understood the consequences of crime better than most attorneys ever would. This time, the system listened. The Michigan Supreme Court overturned the denial. Greg Mathis was officially admitted to the bar. It wasn't a victory lap, it was validation. For the first time, society acknowledged that his past didn't erase his future. As a lawyer, Greg didn't chase prestige, he chased impact. He represented people who looked like his younger self, misunderstood, angry, written off early. Clients trusted him because he spoke their language. Judges noticed because he respected the courtroom. He wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. He was proof that transformation didn't require forgetting where you came from. Soon, Greg became involved in local politics. He saw how decisions made in quiet rooms destroyed lives in loud ways. He ran for office, not as a politician, but as someone who knew the cost of bad systems firsthand. When he won a judgeship in Detroit's 36th District Court, it shocked everyone, including him. The former inmate now sat on the bench. Judge Mathis didn't operate like others. He believed accountability mattered, but so did context. When young defendants stood before him, he didn't just see charges. He saw crossroads. He was tough, but he listened. And that combination made him effective. Instead of feeding people back into the system, he pushed alternatives: education, treatment, discipline with direction. Word spread. This judge was different, not soft, not naive, just honest about how cycles work. Eventually, television noticed. Courtroom TV wasn't new, but this perspective was. A judge who had lived the consequences, not just studied them. What started as an experiment soon became something much bigger. Judge Mathis premiered in 1999, and it exploded, not because of theatrics, but because of authenticity. Viewers didn't just see rulings, they saw lessons. Mathis spoke directly to defendants, parents, and young people watching at home. He didn't shame. He warned. He didn't preach. He explained. Behind the scenes, he stayed committed to mentorship and reform, scholarships, youth programs, community work. Fame didn't soften his message, it amplified it. The kid who once expected to die young had become a national voice for accountability and second chances. But his story isn't powerful because he succeeded. It's powerful because the odds never stopped stacking against him, and he kept climbing anyway. Television success could have rewritten Greg Mathis's priorities. It didn't. While his face became recognizable nationwide, his focus stayed local. He returned to Detroit often, not for cameras, but for kids standing where he once stood, angry, dismissed, and one bad decision away from losing everything. Mathis never pretended the streets were misunderstood. He acknowledged their danger openly. But he also challenged the narrative that some lives were disposable. He funded scholarships, supported legal clinics, and mentored youth who had already been labeled lost causes. What separated him from other public figures was consistency. He didn't just talk about second chances. He built systems that offered them, and quietly, without headlines, he proved that success didn't require abandoning responsibility. Power once meant fear to Greg, control, survival. Now it meant influence without violence, authority without intimidation. As his platform grew, so did his responsibility. He spoke on criminal justice reform, mass incarceration, and the long-term damage caused by treating punishment as a solution. His message wasn't radical, it was personal. He reminded audiences that rehabilitation wasn't a theory. He was living proof. But he never framed himself as exceptional. He insisted the opportunity to change should be normal, not rare. That idea challenged comfort. Because if people can change, then society has to accept responsibility for what happens when it refuses to allow them to. Greg often spoke about friends who didn't survive. Some died young, others disappeared into the system forever. Their stories haunted him more than his own mistakes. He knew how thin the line had been. One different night, one different choice, and his name could have been another statistic. That awareness fueled his urgency. Every case, every speech, every warning came from lived regret, not moral superiority. He wasn't talking down to people. He was talking to who he used to be. That honesty is why his message landed. Because it wasn't about success, it was about consequences. Greg Mathis never packaged redemption as inspiration. He lived it as pressure. Real change didn't arrive with applause. It arrived with resistance. Even after becoming a judge, even after decades without trouble, even after national success, suspicion followed him. Doors still closed quietly. Opportunities still required extra proof. Mistakes from his teenage years still surfaced in conversations decades later. Redemption, he learned, doesn't erase history. It forces you to confront it repeatedly. There were moments when bitterness would have been easier. Moments when walking away from public service would have felt justified. But Mathis understood something most people never have to face. When society doubts your transformation, quitting confirms their fear. So he stayed consistent, not loud, not defensive, just steady. Showing up, doing the work, owning his past without letting it define his present. He believed accountability wasn't punishment. It was responsibility. And responsibility meant never pretending the journey was over. That mindset shaped how he judged others. He knew that one good decision didn't erase years of harm. But he also knew one bad decision didn't have to erase a future. Redemption wasn't comfort. It was discipline. And discipline, repeated long enough, became character. Greg Mathis's story isn't powerful because he escaped the streets. Many don't. It's powerful because he exposed a truth most systems avoid admitting. Some people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because no one expects them to succeed. Mathis didn't just beat the odds. He revealed how fragile those odds were, how close failure always stood. One teacher, one judge, one moment of belief shifted everything. His legacy isn't television ratings or courtroom sound bites. It's the thousands of quiet lives redirected because someone finally listened instead of labeling. He proved that consequences and compassion can coexist, that accountability without hope is cruelty, and that forgiveness without responsibility is meaningless. The system never planned for him to win, and in many ways, it still struggles with people like him. But his life stands as evidence that change is not rare. Opportunity is. And the question his story leaves behind isn't whether redemption is possible. It's whether society is brave enough to allow it.